turn it over to Miriam.
Well, I sent some questions, and I thought we could begin in a very, very relaxed way by reading, choosing a favorite passage, and then telling why we like it. And if you have found no passage that you like, that's okay too. Don't worry about it.
You want us to choose one from each or one
Yeah,
from
which one do we want to do first? Why don't we do one first and then look at the other one?
Should we do Prelude first then? So you
Yes.
can choose a passage from Prelude. That would be great. I'll just listen for this.
Trying to think of which one I read first.
Katherine Mansfield's life was so fascinating.
And what beautiful writing. It really
It's gorgeous. It's beyond gorgeous. Yeah. Yeah. She did it. She actually pulled it off.
So my favorite passage was from At the Bay, but so go ahead. Does someone have their favorite passage from Prelude already?
I have one.
Go for it.
On page 16, and it's one of the few times I think that someone was being very kind to someone else. And this is about the grandmother on the top of page 16. The two left in the kitchen were quiet for a little. Linda leaned her cheek on her fingers and watched her mother. She thought her mother looked wonderfully beautiful with her back to the leafy window. There was something comforting in the sight of her that Linda felt she could never do without. She needed the sweet smell of her flesh and the soft feel of her cheeks and her arms and shoulders still softer. She loved the way her hair curled, silver at her forehead, lighter at her neck, and bright brown still in the big coil under the muslin cap. Exquisite were her mother's hands, and the two rings she wore seemed to melt into her creamy skin. And she was always so fresh, so delicious. The old woman could bear nothing but linen next to her body, and she bathed in cold water, winter and summer. I just thought that was a really beautiful tribute to her mother.
Yes. My goodness.
That's the grandmother. Yeah,
The grandmother, yeah.
wow.
Yeah, I have one also from Prelude. It's from page 32. And it's about Linda.
Mm.
It had never been so plain to her as it was at this moment. There were all her feelings for him, sharp and defined, one as true as the other. And there was this other, this hatred, just as real as the rest. She could have done all her feelings up in little packets and given them to Stanley. She longed to hand him that last one for a surprise.
Mm.
She could see his eyes as he opened that.
Yeah, I remarked on that passage too.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely wonderful.
It's all the secrets in this story. I love all the secrets.
Tell me more about. Oh well, should we do passages first?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that of course that's the secret, and the way people, the way Linda is leading a double life. That the secret life is her hatred.
But that everyone is having a double life, right? Not just Linda.
Not just Linda. No, Beryl certainly is having a double, except perhaps for the children. The children
Right.
being very much themselves.
Yeah.
Very much themselves.
And the grandmother?
Ah, yeah, what about the grandmother? Does she have secrets? I don't think so.
We don't know yet, right?
She's such an idealized
Mhm.
figure, isn't she? So idealized.
Yeah.
Well, I think in the discussion about death,
Mm.
she's so tender until she realizes she can't go any further, you know?
Yeah.
And they just have to end in this little funny, never, no, never, never, no, never. And then they just forget what the never is about.
Yeah.
Of course, she's so incredibly truthful.
Yes,
Right. She wouldn't lie.
right.
She won't lie. She won't lie. I love the scene at night. I have this notion that in some ways people are more truthful at night, or they speak to each other with a kind of intimacy in the dark that they don't always do in the daylight. Alice Munro has a story where people come out and sit on the porch at night and they say things that they couldn't possibly say in the day. But anyway, I'm reading it from hard copy in this book I have of Mansfield here, and the two of them are outside, the mother and the daughter, and Linda is speaking to her mother. She says, this is about the aloe plant. I have been looking at the aloe, said Mrs. Fairchild. I believe it is going to flower this year. Oh, no, I think the grandmother's speaking there. Look at the top there. Are those buds, or is it only an effect of light? As they stood on the steps, the high grassy bank on which the aloe rested rose up like a wave, and the aloe seemed to ride upon it like a ship with the oars lifted. Bright moonlight hung upon the lifted oars like water, and on the green wave glittered the dew. Do you feel it too, said Linda, and she spoke to her mother with the special voice that women use at night to each other, as though they spoke in their sleep or from some hollow cave. Don't you feel that it is coming toward us? She dreamed that she was caught up out of the cold water into the ship with the lifted oars and the budding mast. Now the oars fell striking quickly, quickly. They rowed far away over the top of the garden trees, the paddocks, and the dark bush beyond, and she heard herself cry, faster, faster, to those who were rowing. Wow. Incomparable. Just incomparable. The inner life and the words that why do I like this passage? Well, first of all, it's so gorgeous and so beautifully written. And of course, it's rhythmical. The other trick that Mansfield has, and she does it, and it's not easy to get away with it. She says, bright moonlight hung upon the lifted oars like water, and on the green wave glittered the dew. Usually, syntactically, we say the dew glittered, and you put the verb at the end. But Mansfield, she does that in other places too. She
does.
She puts the verb before.
Yeah.
Subject of the verb.
Yeah, that's nice. That's such a nice variation.
It's a wonderful variation.
Unexpected, lovely.
I mean, it's very Victorian in a way. It's something that maybe the Victorians, Tennyson or somebody would do that in a poem. But she gets the rhythm there, and the two women out at night gazing at this aloe plant. Which then in some other, so I love the intimacy, the description, the atmosphere, the rhythm of the sentences, and it really takes me to a different place when I read Mansfield.
Lovely. Welcome, Doreen.
I'm sorry I'm late. I got a work phone call at 7 just when I was about to come on to the
it's
the
great
call.
to see you. Hi, welcome.
Yeah, no, great to see you. No rush. And what we're doing is that Miriam has asked each of us to read one of our favorite passages, and then just say why it is. So we're just going around that.
Okay.
And we're in Prelude right now. We're talking about
Okay.
Prelude.
By the way, is the aloe the same as a century plant?
I'm not
Because it said that it would only bloom once every century.
sure.
Those are very California things too, as well. New Zealand, I guess.
New Zealand, California, and Florida. A lot of aloe growing in Florida.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So David, do you have a selection from Prelude?
One, actually, it is not there in terms of my favorite passage, but it is what I think struck me most, which I didn't see this as a prelude, but an ending of innocence, really of freedom for they're almost a lament for the young women who have a sort of, through their innocence before they become wives, a certain freedom that is taken out, particularly when husband and wife on the first night, when she goes to turn out the light, and he embraces her and he says, you know, I feel like everything belongs to me. But the aspect of sort of loss and that there's an ending. And so, sorry, I did mine online, so I've got to click on this and hopefully there. And I do not, is it Kisa? Is that pronounced?
Yeah, I think it's, yeah.
Kezia.
After tea, Kezia wandered back to their own house. This is before they moved. Slowly, she walked up the back stairs and through the scullery into the kitchen. Nothing was left in it but a lump of gritty yellow soap in one corner of the kitchen windowsill, and a piece of flannel stained with a big blue bag in another. The fireplace was choked up with rubbish. She poked among it, but found nothing except a hair toddy with a heart painted on it that had belonged to the servant girl. All of this seems to me just a sort of great sense of loss there coming from there, and really where the father is separating them from life and sort of moving them into his own sphere where he even controls the young men that they will see. It really, to me, seemed really like if we start this short story at a hard stop in their life where they're allowed to experience life, and then they're moved into this aspect where they will only see it through their husbands. I also think, and I've lost the young woman's name, who there says, you know, the second baby came so quickly that I didn't have time to make make clothes for it. So the baby is at home. Everything here really sort of seems, you know, that you're sort of going from a freedom there into a captivity in moving them out of there into this area. I don't know if anyone else felt that or not.
Oh, yeah. And of course, they say about the father that it's as if he owns everything, even the good weather, you know. And he will go on making money and I will go on making babies, you know, having babies, says Linda. And she hates him. She cares for him and she hates him at the same time. It's quite complicated.
Oh,
All the women seem to hate him. They can't wait for him to get out of the house.
Then they can breathe.
Right.
Well, welcome, Mark. Just to let you know, Miriam's taking us through each of our favorite passages, and then explain a little bit why.
And we're in Prelude right now.
Yes.
and Mark, if that is not a virtual background, I'm very jealous.
No comment.
That looks very woodsy. Is that
Yeah.
Florida or somewhere else?
I'm in Maine right now.
Ah, yeah.
Glorious.
Nice.
Hey, lucky guy. Okay, that wins the distance award, I think. That's further than Concord.
It is.
Yeah.
Just a bit, not much.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah.
Who else has something from Prelude, a passage?
I'll go if no one wants. I like the part where they cut the duck's head off.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
The beheading.
I never realized, like, I had heard the expression, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off. I never realized that that's actually true until I read this. So thank you for that. But the whole notion that let's see where I can find it. I just love the whole scene. I guess the part that would be the passage would be, watch it, shouted Pat. He put down the body and it began to waddle with only a long spurt of blood where the head had been. It began to pad away without a sound towards the steep bank that led to the stream. That was the crowning wonder. Do you see that? Do you see that? Yelled Pip. He ran among the little girls tugging at their pinafores. It's like a little engine. It's like a funny little railway engine, squealed Isabel. But Kezia suddenly rushed at Pat and flung her arms round his legs and butted her head as hard as she could against his knees. Put head back, she screamed. When he stooped to move her, she would not let go or take her head away. She held on as hard as she could and sobbed, head back, until it sounded like a loud, strange thing. It's stopped. It's tumbled over. It's dead, said Pip. And I like that the most because it seemed to me like some of the characters are in that situation, like we're running around without really thinking of what we're doing, without using our heads. Like, is it Jonathan, the brother-in-law, who goes to work even though he hates it? And his head isn't into it, his heart isn't into it, but he feels that's what he's supposed to do. So I thought that was kind of it encapsulated a lot of the story for me, that we're doing things in a rote way without our heads.
But there was also the mixture of terror and amusement, and then deep interest. Like there was this revulsion about the head, and then later one of the boys goes over and starts to play with it. So it's like things change in terms of how threatening they are, depending on time, I guess, and your own perspective. It was a really an astonishing. You read it the first time and you just see it as a peculiar scene, and then you're right. You think about it and you say, well, this is so significant, really.
And there's another part when they eat the duck, and they describe how it looks, and they say something like, there was no head there, and you would like not even realize that there should have been one, something like that, as if it was now complete in that form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it has a wonderful, I think, mahogany glaze, you know, so it's all brown. In that scene, the children almost become hysterical with excitement, you know. So it's just, they're watching this beheading, and then it comes home to Keatsia what exactly is going on, you know, that it is death. And yet there's something positive. I mean, doesn't he hold her close, and then the children just sort of go on to something else? Yeah, onto something else.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, do you have something from Prelude? I only have a passage from At the Bay.
Mark, are
You're
you?
on mute, Mark.
My internet suddenly got unstable, and you must have just called for me.
Oh, no problem. Do you have a passage from Prelude, or I have one from At the Bay? But go ahead. What do you have? Do you have a?
Sure. I mean, I really just loved how the narrative voice floated in and out of the characters' perceptions, and so I guess my favorite character was Kezia, and her, you know, really childlike imagination. So I could probably pick any of them, but I found myself really liking the language in this part where she was in the garden, and so I'll just do that, I guess. She did not believe that she would ever not get lost in this garden. Twice she had found her way back to the big iron gates they had driven through the night before, and then had turned to walk up the drive that led to the house. But there were so many little paths on either side. On one side, they all led to a tangle of tall, dark trees and strange bushes with flat velvet leaves and feathery cream flowers that buzzed with flies when you shook them. This was the frightening side, and no garden at all. The little paths here were wet and clayey, with tree roots spanning across them like the marks of big fowls' feet. But on the other side of the drive, there was a high box border, and the paths had box edges, and all of them led into a deeper and deeper tangle of flowers. The camellias were in bloom, white and crimson and pink and white, striped with flashing leaves. You could not see a leaf on the syringa bushes for the white clusters. The roses were in flower, gentlemen's buttonhole roses, little white ones, but far too full of insects to hold under anyone's nose. Pink monthly roses with the ring of fallen petals round the bushes, cabbage roses on thick stalks, moss roses always in bud, pink smooth beauties opening curl on curl, red ones so dark they seemed to turn black as they fell, and a certain exquisite cream kind with a slender red stem and bright scarlet leaves. It goes on. but I just found it, almost like a prelude to Faulkner with that, but very feminine, with those, very point of view passages and very evocative and stream of consciousness almost, although the vocabulary is quite sophisticated for a little girl. And then contrasted with her mother later coming down, and from her point of view, everything looks like, what was it? It was like, they look like they're threatening, the same leaves that were so beautiful and endless to the little girl were for the mother, kind of almost threatening and severe.
Mm.
There's something going by noisy, so I should probably go on to mute.
Gorgeous, yeah, gorgeous passage. Such a sensitivity to flowers, and the writing has such a tremendous authority. This is the way it is. It's sort of unapologetic in its appreciation. It's as if it's the inner life of the little girl somehow, what she can see.
Yeah, I think it went into the inner life of all the characters, and that was really the beauty of the story for me.
Yes, yes. Should we go on to At the Bay?
Sure.
Okay.
If you want, I'll start with a selection there. I'll go straight to it.
Go ahead.
Ah, sounded the sleepy sea. And from the bush there came the sound of little streams flowing quickly, lightly, slipping between the smooth stones, gushing into ferny basins and out again. And there was the splashing of big drops on large leaves and something else. What was it? A faint stirring and shaking, the snapping of a twig, and then such silence that it seemed someone was listening.
Yeah.
So interestingly, you all chose passages where people are interacting, either with people or with nature. My favorites were all just straight nature, or sort of without people in it. But what's interesting about this, and this is just the second paragraph of At the Bay, for me, is that well, kind of like what Mark just said, if the narrator is floating in and out, I kind of see it as the narrator is like a spirit who's moving around with these as we follow what the dew off the bay, the fog off the bay is like. And I found her descriptions very evocative, and it animated inanimate things almost in a way like Virginia Woolf and To the Lighthouse. And so I know that they were contemporary, and so I really appreciated, I think, her most from the descriptions, the alive descriptions, and she had many of them.
That opening of the prelude, from the very first word to the idea of this, as if someone were listening in the silence, is just tremendous, absolutely tremendous. And when Mansfield does that, I feel that what she shows us is the importance and unimportance of human life in this setting. So there are so many places where there is this drama going on, some of it very, very difficult, and then we have it set in this absolutely lush paradise, and it creates a kind of gorgeous distance from everything, and in a way takes the sting out of it, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
I think that opening of At the Bay is an absolute marvel.
Mm-hmm.
Absolute marvel. The tone, the description, also the sense of something without boundaries. With this rolling in, you don't know if you're on land, if you're on sea, and you wouldn't be surprised if a fish looked in the window.
Yeah.
And there is a sense of suspense as well, because someone's listening. And that gets to that kind of vibration that you all were talking about, that the characters also are duplicitous. So there's something apparent and not so apparent, and nature seems to be doing that as well.
I think it's perfectly bookended. I love the beginning and I love the last paragraph. Where it is just a dream, and then particularly when the sun is rising, and I think it's a tree that looks like a monster before it comes in, and from there. But Miriam, it's interesting you mentioned Alice Munro with Prelude. I really thought about Alice Munro with this one. And do you remember, and I'm trying to think, the ones where the cousin, in Alice Munro, where the cousins come to visit and they have the day out, and
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I don't think Alice Munro writes the way Katherine Mansfield does. It was just that sense of the nighttime voices that Munro was also very sensitive to. But Mansfield, I would compare her, as Doreen did, or was it Melissa, to Virginia Woolf. They were friends. And Virginia Woolf said that Katherine Mansfield was the only writer she was jealous of. And the Hogarth Press, Leonard and Virginia Woolf published Prelude. So I can't remember what came first, whether it was To the Lighthouse or Prelude, but the influence definitely is there. That
absolutely,
sensitivity, and the incredible powers of description.
You know, it seems like obviously nature just permeates the whole, both stories. But I realized after I read and when I picked the scenes that I wanted to highlight, it was not about people, as you were saying. It's all about animals. And the one that I loved is this. It's toward the beginning. The sandy road was empty except for Trout's dog Snooker, who lay stretched in the very middle of it. His blue eye was turned up, his legs stuck out stiffly, and he gave an occasional desperate-sounding puff, as much as to say he decided to make an end of it and was only waiting for some kind cart to come along. And now that, to me, was also, it smacked of that kind of irony of Flannery O'Connor. You know, it's really kind of bitter, but really hilarious. And plus that, everybody who loves dogs knows that sound, a desperate sounding puff that just, when you're lying down, legs out, goes. It was really evocative. I loved it.
Anyone
A couple of passages that I like. I'd like to read the one about the nighttime that Miriam's been talking about. It's on page 26. Why does one feel so different at night? Why is it so exciting to be awake when everyone else is asleep? Late. It is very late. And yet every moment you feel more and more wakeful, as though you were slowly, almost with every breath, waking up into a new, wonderful, far more thrilling and exciting world than the daylight one. And what is this queer sensation that you're a conspirator? Lightly, stealthily, you move about your room. You take something off the dressing table and put it down again without a sound. And everything, even the bedpost, knows you, responds, shares your secret.
Oh.
Here's your secret. Yeah.
You know, I'm sort of torn between seeing this all as very impressionistic and then sometimes seeing it as surreal. And they overlap to me. I mean, when at one point, when Linda's describing the way things change as she encounters them, you know, it's surreal. It's kind of like a Dali designed dream in a Hitchcock movie. Things they just change in front of her and come up in importance and then disappear. It's really gripping, I think.
And it really is, at least from the final paragraph, I was left wondering, really, was this a dream rather than a day? Of when you go, let's see if I can find it.
The last paragraph.
Yeah, yeah.
A
A cloud, small, serene, floated across the moon. In that moment of darkness, the sea sounded deep, troubled. Then the cloud sailed away, and the sound of the sea was a vague murmur, as though it had been waked out of a dark dream. All was still.
wonderful ending.
Oh, it's beautiful. All of it was just beautiful. I really reread passages just because they were beautiful.
There's another section, and that's where Linda, the mother, is with the little boy under the manila tree.
That's my favorite.
The baby.
Yeah, with the baby.
It's on page 13.
Yeah, I'm looking at it, as I said, in hard copy. Let's see. Linda frowned. She sat up quickly in her steamer chair and clasped her ankles. Yes, that was her real grudge against life. That was what she could not understand. That was the question she asked and listened in vain for an answer. It was all very well to say it was the common lot of women to bear children. It wasn't true. She, for one, could prove that wrong. She was broken, made weak. Her courage was gone through childbearing. And what made it doubly hard to bear was that she did not love her children. It was useless pretending. Even if she had had the strength, she never would have nursed and played with the little girls. No, it was as though a cold breath had chilled her through and through on each of those awful journeys. She had no warmth left to give them. As to the boy, well, thank heaven Mother had taken care of him. He was Mother's or Beryl's or anybody who wanted him. She had hardly held him in her arms. She was so indifferent about him that as he lay there, Linda glanced down. This is incredible. So with all of those, we have this portrait of a woman, of a mother who does not love her children. And then Mansfield does a remarkable thing. A few paragraphs down, the little boy is smiling and smiling, and then something happens in Linda. She says, that was not what she felt. It was something far different. It was something so new. So the tears danced in her eyes. She breathed in a small whisper to the boy, hello, my funny. But you wouldn't think that somehow she's going to become the great mother. I found this section absolutely radical and devastating, and without judgment.
Yeah.
There's no judgment on Mansfield's part. And that leads me to the next question about, this notion of, I thought Henry James was brilliant, that what you did when you wrote fiction is that you completed the character that you knew in life and that you changed it. And I do know, you don't want to read in biography, but I believe that what Mansfield did here was complete the mother's character by warming her up a bit and having her respond to the baby.
But he had already looked away.
And given the baby the freedom as babies have to look away.
Right. So by the time she warmed up to him, he was over. He wasn't looking anymore.
Of course, he was a baby and had that, the vitality of the baby. So if you know something about Mansfield's life, the coldness was true. When Katherine Mansfield was in a great deal of difficulty, the mother came to England, where Mansfield was living, trying to establish herself as a writer and having a lot of adventures. And Katherine Mansfield became pregnant by her first lover. The mother came to England, scooped her up. They went to Germany, to a pension in Germany. And when the mother realized what was going on, other things as well, Mansfield's relationship with very close friendship with another woman, the mother immediately dumped her, left her in Germany, went back to New Zealand and cut her out of her will.
Wow.
So my sense here is now, would I have sense, if I didn't know this about Katherine Mansfield's life and her relationship to her mother, would I have felt that she completed the character? Well, maybe not so strongly, but what I do feel, if you push the biographical details away, what I do feel is that she avoids what would be almost a stereotypical view of the cold mother. And she gives her this other moment, this quick change of heart. And I thought it was a marvelous thing to be able to do. We read so much fiction in which we have monsters of one kind or another, you know, and the bad father, the bad mother, the endless. And here we have something very, very different. Here is a mother who is indifferent to the child, and yet then something changes. And even if it only lasts for a few seconds, it does happen. And I feel that it's a more interesting portrayal and a rounder portrayal of this woman.
So Miriam, out of curiosity, would you say that justifies or completes?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that. Did you?
Well, because your question was, well, are there any characters in these stories you believe Mansfield creates by justifying and completing their actual models? So
Yes.
is this an instance of justifying and completing?
Yes, I would say so, definitely. And I think it's a marvelous move. You sense that Katherine Mansfield has thought long about mothers who are indifferent to their children. And yet she gives her this moment, this possibility.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe Henry James could have used the word, rather than complete, we give our characters another possibility. And we read.
Well, up until then, I think she's been portrayed. I think there's a quote even in that same scene where you talk about her little air of remoteness.
Yes.
Her distance, and she dreamed the morning away. And when she's sitting, I think it was in the beginning of Prelude, she's always in sort of a chaise lounge, barely engaging with anybody socially or verbally. It's just, she's like a sock, a wet sock. And this finally reveals to you what's under all of that, this anger. And then of course the anger later directed at her husband. But then, because this is a creation of her own, I think she breaks that second, and she has a realization that somehow this is connected to her, and has that moment, where she says, "My little funny." It's poignant, very poignant.
Yeah, it is poignant. She does respond. And then the whole sense of sexuality. The husband is a very virile, sexual man who adores her, but he's too much for her. And then she's afraid of becoming pregnant again. This is a time when even educated people weren't doing much about birth control. So the fear of that. But she's a poignant character, Linda, somehow.
I just don't believe him at all in his ardent expressions of love. It's because he's the guy who runs the show and she's his wife, and he's supposed to do this. He's supposed to give her little kisses and tell her how much he loves her and all that. But he couldn't give a rusty, seems to me. he's demanding everything all the time. Go tell him to stop the carriage.
Yeah.
Go and get my tea. Go and get, he's just the insidious bossiness. And the scene at the swimming hole is really telling. Oh, you ruined my bathe. You know, he's just insufferable.
There's no poetry.
Yeah. I mean, I'd almost take, what's his name? The other guy, the handsome one.
Mr. something.
At least he's just a little more direct.
Mr. Kember.
Yes.
The gigolo.
Yeah, the gigolo.
Right.
They're a couple, aren't they?
Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, all of that.
I mean, that's one thing I thought, only time I thought of a movie, I would have loved to have seen who those two people would be. Her with her, you know, who would be cast in that olive oil character playing against this unbelievably, this heartthrob. It's really something. It was great. It was really great.
It is interesting how the father, Stanley, he orders the old lady around.
Yeah.
The grandmother, his mother-in-law, she's just, in a way, a kind of servant in the house, but yet not. I mean, it seems to me that it is the grandmother who keeps everything going in a way. He keeps everything going. But in a sense, it's the grandmother who cares for the children, who makes order in the kitchen.
Yeah, and Linda even says, she said, I haven't even been in the kitchen. And then she looked and she said, she did the whole thing. It's my mother's kitchen.
Yeah.
Amazing, yeah.
It does seem to be a pretty devastating portrait of a patriarchal colonial
Misogynist.
island economy in more than one way. And I have a pet theory, sort of psychologically, that people growing up on an island have a more difficult time. It's kind of a fear-based, that they're separated and they're all stuck together. And it certainly feels that way here. It was completely devastating. I don't think I've read other New Zealand literature, and it's really uncomfortable there for me.
Harold, the sister, is under his control as well. She doesn't have money, and
Right.
she keeps dreaming, and she has these romantic fantasies of the man who's going to rescue her, and she's not free as well. And in the description of Beryl, there's her false self and her real self.
Mhm.
And she writes this, chatty letter to her friend Nan, and then hates herself in a sense for doing it. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because I really sort of felt that the years of marriage are a servitude where you lose your identity. The children have their identity, and the grandmother there does. But when the idea that you're married, you really do, you really are sort of lost as no more than the servant girl, and the wisdom that comes with the grandmother is almost one that has been liberated from strife.
Mm. Because
Right, and everybody has their role, right?
Right.
And then have their role to provide. The women do this. Yeah.
Well, and there's the widow also, who talks about freedom because she's widowed.
yes,
Exactly. Yeah.
one has the shop. There's one route to freedom, and that's the interesting woman with the tattered underwear, Mrs. Harry Kember, who's constantly smoking, and it's a scandal at the Bay, right? Very interesting character. And her attitude, she says to Beryl, "You're so gorgeous, you're so lovely. I believe in young women having a good time."
You
So
should never wear clothes.
this to her, right?
And you made your spouse put on pants.
Yeah.
I know. It's my fault.
And then the notion of the gigolo, the incredibly handsome guy who's out there, and she goes to him, but she's afraid, and very, very rightly so. I mean, in that world, she certainly wouldn't have the strength to carry on with someone like that.
Right.
That is a route to freedom, but it is a scandal.
Plus, it has no future, really. He gets bored pretty easily.
Oh, no future whatsoever. No future whatsoever.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't know what you all thought, but I forget the name of the cigarette smoking lady on the beach. But it
Mrs.
seemed like
Camber.
it seemed like a come on, and that Beryl was a little bit taken aback.
Yeah. Well, they explain away. She explains it away as if she's just shy and she's never disrobed in front of anybody. But it definitely seemed a little lesbian to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's definitely erotic, and you could also say that Mrs. Harry Kember was setting her up with the gigolo.
Right.
In other words, that this kind of trap.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one point, I think, where Mansfield says that Mrs. Harry Kember looked like a version of her husband.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Remember that? It was so worn and whatever.
That was kind of surprising because she's portrayed as being such a mess, and her husband is such a god. When that came out, I said, "Wow, what does that mean?" You know.
I picture her as looking something like Diana Vreeland.
Yeah.
In any case, it is erotic. She's admiring her body, and she's really saying to her, go out, have experience, enjoy yourself. But in this world, it would be an absolute scandal. And it has nothing to do with Beryl's romantic fantasies of how she's looked at and the young lover who's going to come to her and rescue her.
It seems so tragic that this situation seems to be such an entrapment for these people, when it's sort of like, didn't anybody ever think of just like opening the gate and walking out? But they didn't.
Look what happened to the dog, and look what happened to the duck. There was no escape in their fate.
You know what? There was another. I have to read this. I haven't got a hanky, she said. I want one badly too. Here, Lottie, you can use mine.
Yeah.
Rags dipped into his sailor blouse and brought up a very wet-looking one, knotted together. Be very careful, he warned her. Only use that corner. Don't undo it. I've got a little starfish inside I'm going to try and tame. Everybody wants to rule over everything. It's really something.
Well, and Robert, it does seem claustrophobic. It's like maybe it's the island part where there's nowhere to go.
Yeah,
it's not easy to jump a boat as so it just has that feeling like there's no escape. Also,
it's the economics. It's the question. Has the money.
Mm-hmm.
The grandmother doesn't have the money. Lynn may have some money of her own, but not very much. So economically, he's in control.
Yeah.
He pays the bills.
A room of one's own.
Right.
Yep. They don't possess anything as women. They don't.
They don't possess anything.
Yeah.
Except what he gives them.
Yes. And that is almost, I mean, it's given, but it's almost a loan. It still isn't theirs.
Right.
Well, the wonderful thing when he buys oysters and a pineapple, and then he buys a pound of cherries. He eats most of the cherries.
It's 8 o'clock.
He won't share them with the man because he doesn't know him well enough yet.
Yeah.
To the driver of the the carriage, and he brings a little one, a couple of cherries home, but he definitely takes care of himself. He buys himself a pair of gloves at one point, right?
Oh, but he thought of her while he did that.
Yes, he did. He thought of-
So generous.
do you think that Mansfield is unfair to this character, or I don't know. I'm not.
To Stanley? To Stanley, you mean?
Yeah, to Stanley.
My sense was that this was like a extremely feminist, like modernist breakthrough kind of storytelling for its time. That, like, I was thinking about Little Women, and yeah, Jo was independent, but she ultimately wanted to get married. And this woman is like breaking down all the barriers, right? She's having like sex with a married guy. She's having lesbianish stuff. She's having a mother who doesn't love her kids. She's just going up against like every institution. And even her brother-in-law is like enslaved by this system where he's unhappy, would rather be an artist of some kind, but he goes to the office because he has to provide for his kids. And people are like stuck.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible critique of capitalism, patriarchy. I wasn't exact of the system at that time.
Yeah, and where's the redemption?
In the grandmother.
Hmm.
And in the plants and the atmosphere
Mhm.
and the natural world that holds them somehow.
Mm.
That's where it is.
I
And
didn't feel like there had to be in stories so short.
Redemption, you mean?
I don't think she's any more unfair to him than to any. I mean, she exposes them all, you know. So you see their attitudes and judgmentalism and elitism and you know savagery and all these things that she just shows it. I mean, you say that it's non-judgmental, and yet what she shows is such clear portraits of things that are extremely judgmental that in itself is the judgment.
I meant in connection to the mother figure, that she gives her that moment of connection. Takes a kind of a very long view of it all somehow.
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, I think that's true with all of them. I mean, she presents them with all their flaws, and very honestly. And I guess that's the non-judgmental part, is that she just presents them and doesn't try to, draw a moral conclusion from it. And yet she presents them in these lights that are where you see, how she thinks about it because how she framed it.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, even something as simple as, oh, there's nobody around here, but this was the other one. Nobody around here, but some farmers. I forget how she put it. It was like such a disparaging view of like the farmers are just not even people. They're just one step above animals, working the land around them.
Yeah, there's a definite kind of British classism, even in the use of language and how
Yeah.
mispronounced words were used to show the level. But I must say, I think the women are portrayed with more facets, and the men seems quite simple, almost doltish. Was just my impression.
Well, except for Jonathan, I mean, from the very beginning, Jonathan says that Stanley has to make a job of everything.
Yeah.
And he's really offended deeply, but he's not a judgmental person. But he says also, you have to give way to the ebb and flow of life. This is the way to live. And that comes out later, in his meeting with Linda, when he talks about why he shouldn't go to the office and how he wants freedom. And I'm just hoping that, the Pip and Rags will somehow end up having a little bit more of his sensibility. By the way, while I was reading this, I reached over on my windowsill and I found, look, it's a nemerald.
Mm.
I couldn't believe it. It was staring right at me, just over here.
Perfect.
Sits there all the time, and when I read that, I went, holy mackerel, I've got one.
I kept coming back to comparing this to Little Women. Like, the other was so moral and this wasn't. This was like a middle-class family. The other was a poor family. The other one, everything ends in marriage, and this ends in, like, yes, there's a marriage, but it's not a happy one. And just on every single level. And if that was a story that, told about independent women and women making their way, this was a story about, like, the angst of having it all but having nothing, sort of like, I don't know, the movie Blue Velvet or something, or, the white picket fence and everything looks like it should be great, but inside it's just completely screwed up. And this poor woman, maybe her husband really believed he was giving her, like, the best life, and this property was going to increase in value in the burbs, and she just couldn't be more unhappy.
She has an interesting view of her husband. She says, and I thought this was interesting, two Stanleys, one sensitive and the other the businessman who makes a job of everything. So she sees a different and has experienced a different Stanley. The one that's quick.
Come out often.
Not
she
often.
Can't find it often, right?
Not often, yeah. But it's there. And I think that that's also very interesting. That's why one of the reasons Mansfield is so good, because she allows that through Linda's viewpoint, that there is another side to the man.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't think she identifies that with lovemaking, though, and baby producing.
No, absolutely right. Absolutely. Right. No, lovemaking, he overwhelms her too forcefully and frightens her, really. Right. And she wants to scream. Yeah. Remember, that's really quite shocking. Yes.
The thing that struck me with both short stories is there, to me, two senses of time. One is the characters that are younger and are struggling in the moment, but the grandmother has the moment of reflection, and it's almost as if she's on a whole different their sense of time, where she I think particularly when she has the child who is lying beside her after the day and so forth, you get the sense that the grandmother has lived through the struggles and sort of has a sense of I won't say a peace, but of making her peace with the life that she's led, and that is sort of you're in the moment with the children, you're in the moment with their parents, and then you have the power of reflection to the grandmother.
Yes, and when she tells the story of her son who was killed in an accident, also she looks back through the years, and she's no longer devastated by it all. Just as you say.
Well, I guess there's hope in growing old.
And I guess since I don't have that power of reflection, I'm not old yet.
Kezia blinked and considered the picture again, a little man fallen over like a tin soldier by the side of a big black hole. Does it make you sad to think about him, Grandma? She hated her grandma to be sad. It was the old woman's turn to consider. Did it make her sad? To look back, to stare down the years as Kezia had seen her doing, to look after them as a woman does long after they were out of sight. Did it make her sad? No, life was like that. No, Kezia, she said. But why? Asked Kezia. She lifted one bare arm and began to draw things in the air. Why did Uncle William have to die? He wasn't old. Mrs. Fairfield began counting the stitches in threes. It just happened, she said, in an absorbed voice. Just wonderful seeing. Staring down the years. So that's the moment of philosophical calm, and I think if you talk about redemption, it's in the figure of the grandmother.
I know we're supposed to be reticent about reading in the biographies, but it does, we haven't mentioned before, is Mansfield Kezia then, and this is her story about a cold mother and a warm grandmother.
She was very attached to the grandmother.
Yeah.
This is her own mother, as I said, Beauchamp was the name. She, as soon as Mansfield got in trouble, the mother cut her out of the will.
Mm-hmm.
And she really never saw, Mansfield left this life. She insisted and talked her father into giving her an allowance. He gave her £100 a year. Not a lot, but something. And she went back, she had studied, and her sisters at King's College in London, and then came back to New Zealand, and in her early 20s went back to London and never went back to New Zealand again.
But like James, an exile.
An exile, and lived in England and in other places, died very, very young. And so she left this world.
Yeah, very. So did anyone else think that Kezia was the author's perspective?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, Kezia was the most loved in the story,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, she's the one with the imagination that runs wild.
Mm-hmm.
And she won't let anyone see her cry. That was a nice passage too.
And as someone pointed out, the connection to the grandmother. But of course, Mansfield is recreating herself. That again, we want to be careful of saying she was exactly this child. It's her imagination of what a young, spirited Kezia would be like.
And if you think that the grandmother is the redemption character and that Kezia is the author's, early persona, then it's interesting how Kezia was going into, taking little bits of nature and assembling them into the matchboxes and thinking about every day giving her grandmother a little assembled artistic gift, and her grandmother would always be, oh, that's exactly what I wanted, was a matchbox. And
Sweet.
it was a really tender moment, and it was the artistic process. And it's interesting that the grandmother was the audience for this, and that Kezia could see herself just doing it over and over again every day for her.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question, please?
Go ahead. No, go
Does
ahead.
a story have to have redemption?
No way. No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
Okay.
Like life, right? Not always redeemed. So
Maybe just beyond some of the faults in the younger ones.
So from Linda's point of view, I mean, I had this question about, views of the ambivalence and ambivalent views of marriage. Linda certainly has one. The hidden hatred for the husband. I think it was we looked at that passage, that shocking passage very early on. So there's that ambivalence, and Mansfield gives it to Linda to express.
It almost goes beyond ambivalence. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not much on the other side to balance it.
Well, there isn't. The other couple we have is, the Harry Kembers.
Right. Also, what about the SJs?
Oh yes, aren't they wonderful? Now, some people might criticize this story as being so, in a sense, bigoted about about class, but the SJs are just wonderful.
Well, do you ever meet him, the husband?
Never meet the husband. There's a pack of kids,
And then she has this terrible speech impediment.
yes, and a face like jelly.
I was sort of drawn to laugh about it, but I thought I shouldn't be laughing. I'm not sure this is meant to be humorous. It's just another character, another person with another set of oddities.
But so generous, taking care of the children, and this the Bernal household is very controlled.
Yeah.
Absolutely controlled. What goes on in the main house. The children have their own little world, but the rest of it is very orderly. The kitchen and the meal times and children's clothes and all of that. And the Samuel Josephs it's a wild pack.
Yeah. Very wild. And I was trying to find the thing that she says with her speech impediment that makes it sound like the opposite of what she's actually saying. Oh, I wrote it down here someplace. Or maybe I'll find it.
I don't think it's an impediment. I think it's a class issue, like an illiteracy issue.
Do you really?
Yeah. I found it disparaging.
No, it was disparaging not in any case, but yeah, I'll never find it. But what did you think of Mrs. Stubbs? I love how she says, "Give me size."
Size, right?
Women's best.
Yeah.
Bizarre.
She runs the shop. Well, she's a very vital, vulgar character. Vital and vulgar. The tea she puts out, and the quantity of the food is vulgar.
And you can't even find a pair of shoes that the right and left match.
So it's again these chaotic worlds outside the Bernals household.
Right.
The shop, the overabundance, gluttony, in other words, absolutely. And then the outfit that the maid is wearing, and
when she goes to meet her,
it's politically incorrect, but Mansfield just goes ahead in her own way. Yeah.
Mm.
Wonderful stories. So I asked,
Wonderful stories indeed.
is there anything that marks the stories as being particularly, written by a New Zealand writer?
Well, just some of the language and the references.
I come back to the sense of isolation.
Yeah, that was such an interesting point. There is an island world.
Mm-hmm.
And far away from they're not too far from Australia, but besides that, they are nowhere. They're way out, like a maroon boat in the middle of the sea.
You feel more in New Zealand than you do in Australia.
Mm.
Just because of its size. It has a different feel. Mm. It's probably like the difference between, Jamaica and Australia. It's just something else. Different scale.
But on another level, the descriptions of the landscape and the plants, it's like an Eden.
Right.
Isolated, but so incredibly gorgeous.
Yeah.
I've never been to New Zealand, but that's where Lord of the Rings was filmed, right? So it's a pretty dramatic place.
Because of the tropical nature, I have a feeling they lived in the North Island, because that's the only one I've visited is the North Island, and that's where all the wine growing is, and it's just gorgeous. The South Island is mountainous, and that's where the movies were shot.
Okay.
Lots of snow, and Dunedin. A friend of mine is from Dunedin, which is on the South Island.
And are there sheep everywhere? Is that so? There's no reticence of the sheep, north or south?
No, but well, I would think they have more sheep stations up north, but there are wild sheep, like mountain goats and sheep that live on the south.
Okay. Well, I did go to because I found it such a mysterious, almost impenetrable author. I did go to Wikipedia just to try to get some background. And it was county suburb of Karori. And does anyone know where that is? It's
No.
And that sorry?
Can you spell it?
It's Carori, Karori. So the other interesting thing I'd say is that this supposedly these were the happiest years of Mansfield's childhood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is, I can see Doreen's reaction. It's like, wow, that was as good as it gets. That was tough.
See any connection between the character of Ketsia and someone like Scout, as represented by the author, as either somewhat biographical or autobiographical, and also very commonly, I don't remember the name of the girl, but in Member of the Wedding, the little girl in that also often referred to as being an offshoot of the author.
Mm.
Do you think it would have been different for you guys if these weren't separate short stories, but part of like a big novel?
Mansfield didn't want to write a New Zealand novel, and these were to be part of it, I believe, but she didn't live long enough to do it.
Just connected short stories. It was nice. For me, it was really refreshing to read the second one. I didn't know that they were connected. And so I was like, oh, I already know these people. So it made the second one much faster to read.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. I felt the same way.
And again, that's why I really sort of felt a kinship with Alice Munro and her short stories, because you get to know the characters and then you get to see them in a different facet, a different time in her short stories.
And as exiles tend to do, I think my impression was that these short stories together would have been a body of work about her homeland. And I think I remember somewhere that actually the name, preliminary name was Karori. So I don't know if that was for a series of the stories or one of these stories, but she seemed to even if it wasn't a completed project, it certainly seems to me as though that short stories are very connected. And is there one other, Miriam, that deals with this same time period?
There's one, I think it's called The Voyage, which is also very touching, in which the two characters are the grandmother and the little girl. So if you have a chance to read that one, I would definitely suggest it. The Voyage, I think it's called. I'll double check and if I have the title right. Another interesting thing, the section about Linda, the mother, when she has these visions that objects and things are alive, it's in these dreamlike states. That's something that Mansfield gives to her that I believe were very characteristic of Mansfield, where things came alive for her. So it's interesting the way a writer feels. She gives her a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but Mansfield also put herself into the mother. Definitely, absolutely, and even her sensitivity to the aloe plant.
But when she describes those things, there's a kind of wonder and a kind of disappointment at the same time. Things don't turn out. There's a little line here. Yes, everything had come alive down to the minutest, tiniest particle, and she did not feel her bed. She floated up, held up in the air. Only she seemed to be listening with her wide, open, watchful eyes, waiting for someone to come who just did not come. watching for something to happen that just did not happen.
Yeah.
Miriam, and your comment about the author being in more than one character, it makes me think that there's that old quip that sometimes the things we least like in our parents, we become.
Yeah, very. Or there's another theory, I don't know whether it's true or not, that what we do is in our lives, we live out the repressed lives of our parents.
Mm.
What our parents did not do, somehow or other, we are propelled to do.
Including careers, absolutely. That one does things that they had wanted to do but didn't do.
I think that this story is so New Zealand, and I think it's as you have all pointed out, it has to do so much with the descriptions of the landscape. Absolutely. And the words, the manuka tree, you know, the particular vegetation, the sense of being so close to a very soft ocean that welcomes you, a warm ocean, certainly not the coast of Brittany or England, or this very, very different in that sense.
And there is that British colonial sort of thought, because it's as though their mores were made for a cold island, and yet they're in an environment which is completely out of character almost for a British colonial whatever. And as I think most of us know, the Brits tend to have really taken their home culture and just grafted it into the places where they're at. So the people overseas in the colonies were almost more British than the British.
Yeah.
With the tea and the maid's uniform.
Yeah.
Right?
And so there's also that. There's the island and the people who just, I'm not sure they really belong there. They integrate in some ways, but they just seem like odd couples also.
And they send their children to England to be educated.
Yeah.
Anything, I'm sure that because of the time, of the Maori people or any native inhabitants. In fact, the farmers, as you were saying, Miriam, are looked down upon, and they're not even indigenous. They're just like, you know, peasant people from England.
Yes.
To Mansfield's credit, I did read that she went on and to write stories that were very Maori concentrated, and she loved them. So she wanted to
really
to raise them up. So just to her credit.
Well, that's good to know.
But don't we all find the structure of life somewhat of a straitjacket? I mean, isn't that really what she's talking about? Don't we all sort of chafe against those things?
Oh, sure.
Mm-hmm.
Are you chafing, David?
Not anymore, but I've embraced failure.
You are
That's
the
your tennis occupation.
But by our mistakes, is that's where we learn the most. So it makes you a very wise man, I take it.
If our mistakes don't destroy us, right?
And they certainly make for better stories.
Well, I'll take that. Absolutely.
Miriam, I have to say, the image of you on this screen is so gorgeous. Your lighting is
graphic.
Isn't it like Delatour? It's like a candle. And
Oh, see, I was thinking Vermeer.
I was thinking
Delatour is good.
Let's going with Vermeer.
I go Rembrandt. Out of Darkness.
Just beautiful. I want to take a picture of the screen.
Exactly.
I had visions of everybody. You know, I said to John the other night, I said, did you ever think we would end up living in Concord, New Hampshire, in a house that was built in 1840 or something? I think it's 1840. And it's a very Victorian house. Maybe there are ghosts in it. I'm not quite sure. But this business of where life takes you, you know.
Are you in town, Miriam? Can you describe, or are you out more separated in the suburbs?
Right in town, I can actually see the Capitol from the sitting room window, from the parlor window. There's the golden dome of the Capitol building.
Because one time you shared with us your walk, and I thought it was going up a mountainside, and where you, or maybe a park or a garden, and you met someone.
A nice garden outside, so I think I took you around to the garden. But that business about the constraints of life, and then we also feel it now with the being sequestered and the pandemic, but just life itself. I mean, the daily routine, especially if you're longing for ecstatic experience, very often life brings us down to a very, very different level, doesn't it?
Yes.
Washing the dishes.
It's so appropriate because since mid-March, we have all been living in our own New Zealands.
Yep.
Isolated.
Isolation, exactly. Exactly. It's a very strange view.
Forgive me, I've got to leave. Someone's going to call me at 8:30. I enjoyed this so much. The short stories were beautiful. Good to see you. I'm sorry to have to
Hi,
leave.
David.
Hi, David.
Bye-bye.
David.
Bye-bye.
Glad you came. Glad you came.
Yeah, I got to thank you, Miriam, for bringing these to us. These were just.
Well, she's an absolutely wonderful writer, and her life was very, very poignant. She died too young. If you want to, you can read. After she died, her husband, John Middleton Murray, put together selections from her diary. Those are available. I've got the collected short stories right here. And then there's a very good biography of hers. I think I mentioned the biographer Claire Tomalin, and which gives a very full picture of Mansfield's life. She can become a kind of cult figure, and she did once her diary was published. Her husband created her as a kind of saint, but she was really, really remarkable. And she broke away from what could have been an absolutely stultifying, smothering life in New Zealand, and broke free. And wrote this magical prose that just floats off the page.
It really was groundbreaking. Miriam, before we let you go, I was curious about your last question and what you thought about it. That Chekhov gave advice about writing. If you want to touch the reader's heart, try to be colder. What is the temperature of these stories, or does Chekhov's caution not apply to Mansfield?
Well, I think it was really wonderful advice. Someone sent him her own short story, and it was very melodramatic. There was a lot of weeping, and this was Chekhov's advice. You know, you're sighing, your characters are weeping, and I thought it was wonderful advice. By colder, I think he also meant objective, and I think Mansfield does that. And where she becomes, I would say the temperature in some sections is cool. The ending that David pointed out so much about, that image of the cloud, a cloud, small, serene, floated across the moon. I would say that the temperature there is beautifully cool, but not cold, not frigid, almost a kind of philosophical distance. And I would say it not cold, but objective, a kind of objective coolness. And Mansfield has that. Certainly in that scene with she did not love her children, you know, that Linda scene. Objective, cool. You could say it's also taking the long view. All the descriptions of that at the bay, the beginning of the mist, the sheep, the bushes, the moisture. Again, this, to me, is this kind of objective long view. And Chekhov had it. Chekhov had it. she learned a lot from Chekhov. There's one story of hers which just ends, I think it's Prelude, where Kitsia takes the cover off the jar on the dressing room table and it tumbles to the floor. She thinks it's broken. That is so Chekhov. There's no moral, right? It's wonderful. How do you end a story? He has one, I think, in which a button falls on the floor and gets, caught in a floorboard or something, and it just.
Oh, yeah.
In other words, it's inconsequential. It's like a little shrug, and that's how the story ends. And in that sense, Chekhov is very modern, and Mansfield is very modern. Also, there's no plot.
Yeah. She mentions that the floorboard thing, I think, in that very early scene where she goes back to the house.
Yes.
They've moved out, and she sees things between the floorboards.
She sees something between the floorboard, and then she sees little tufts on the nails where the carpet had been pulled off.
Right.
Of course, Mansfield's got this 3D vision, doesn't she?
Yes.
That's another thing that's incredible about her, that the noticing.
Yes.
The noticing.
And if you share even a little bit of that, you know exactly what she's talking about what she's thinking about when she mentions those details. It's so lifelike. It's so real. It's like that's what you see when in a moment like that, when you're really mourning the passing of something, and you want to take notice of every single thing, so you never forget it.
Everything lights up in a way and becomes very, very present. And Mansfield had that. She was very good friends with D.H. Lawrence. He had it too. Everything is alive. Everything is close. Sometimes unbearably so.
And Miriam, your question about temperature is very interesting to me. To me, it's cool to a little on the colder side, but then that does add to the contrast that when there are sparks of love or things going on, the contrast and the emphasis is all the more. So you almost value it more.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. Well, here we are in 2020, right?
Not exactly the clarity of vision that 2020 would imply, but here we are.
That's right. One century later.
Yeah.
1 century later. But doesn't this seem so with it?
Yeah.
Very modern. I mean, so it really was groundbreaking from the sound of it.
It was.
Well, Miriam, thank you. I don't think
Thank you, Miriam.
don't know how I would have been introduced to a New Zealand author without you. There wasn't a Maori contemporary something or another. So I really appreciate your.
Oh, I'm glad you liked it, because I'm obviously she's one of my saints. So you can't help being invested.
Yeah.
I hope they like it. I was thinking something, but how can you not? Well, I suppose maybe from a Marxist point of view, you would hate her class biases and find it, a kind of bourgeois presumption, the Bernals and everything. But I don't let those things bother me.
Well, I'm just going to listen to Kiri Te Kanawa tonight.
Oh, that's great.
She's one of my favorites.
One of Mansfield's first loves was a Maori woman, a princess, actually, who was at the same school in New Zealand that she was. And that's interesting as well. Lots of interesting stuff. Well, it's good to connect with everybody. We'll be talking about Colette next time. Unbelievable.
Now, when is our next meeting?
Colette.
Yeah, at the very beginning of the session, I went over the results. I'll send them by email. I brought them to Miriam and Robert because they each had books that were chosen, so we were just checking on dates. So we're privileged, not only that Miriam shared her passion for Mansfield tonight, but that 1 month from now, she'll join us again and introduce us if we don't know already. Colette.
I'm so excited. I've never read that book.
If you were a viewer.
I've never read it, and I've always wanted to, and I'm so happy. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I haven't read it for a while, so it'll be a reread for me. And Colette, of course, is again one of these absolutely marvelous writers, and very modern, very, very sophisticated. So, my dears, it was great to connect, and see you next
Look forward to that one.
Be well, everyone. Be well.
Bye, everyone.
You
Thanks,
too.
Ben.
Hey,
Bye,
well,
everyone.
our northern New Englanders.
Bye.
Okay, see you in a month.
What do you mean?
Dark, you're fading
dark
into
up
the
here.
darkness there.
It is dark.
Thanks, Melissa,
Bye.
for joining us again. That's wonderful.
Thank you all.
You all.
Yes,
Thank
bye.
you so
Bye.
much,
See you next
Miriam.
time.
Bye, Robert.
Take,
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Matt.
Be
Thanks,
well.
all.
take care.